Hi there, and welcome to the sixth and final part of my deep dive into what Miss Letby actually said on the witness stand during her original trial. Before looking at Miss Letby's Child L testimony, I need to briefly revisit Child I to make you aware of a further strand in the psychological operation of deception, which included that photo which I used as my thumbnail last time around. It is another of the many insinuations in the judge's summing up, but this one is particularly insightful of his sheer malice towards Miss Letby and more or less open agenda to see her convicted. This is so because it flies in the face of direct contemporaneous witness evidence corroborating Miss Letby's own account of the incident, an incident with no direct bearing on the Child I murder charge, as it was a minor one fully 10 days before that fatal collapse. Here's what he said. Please pay close attention to the third sentence. I quote report. For the second event, the judge says Ashleigh Hudson noted Lucy Letby saying Child I looked quite pale. When the light was turned on, Child I looked very pale, and the monitor was not sounding. Neo-puffing was established, heart rate in 50s. Letby wrote her note later, and the judge says she would have been able to see Nurse Hudson's note at the time of writing. Letby. Child I noted to be pale in cut by myself. Staff Nurse Hudson present. Apnoea alarm in situ and had not sounded. Minimal shallow breaths followed by gasping observed. End report quote. I couldn't exactly miss James Goss implying that Miss Letby had simply copied her own entry from Hudson's back when I was going through his summing up for my previous project, but being unaware of the existence of the photo and the associated deception operation at the time, I was unable to see the full significance. It was a curious thing for him to feel the need to say, and as such naturally caused for suspicion, but not having an identifiable peg on which to hang that suspicion, I chose not to include it in my critique of his summing up. He is basically so intent on attacking Miss Letby here that he is willing to leave himself open to semantic ridicule by accepting the same state of affairs when given as evidence by Hudson, while literally in the same breath suggesting that same information is to be treated with caution when it is presented as truth by Miss Letby. Even if the two entries were word for word, suggesting that Miss Letby had simply cut and pasted Hudson's pre-existing note to submit as her own entry, that would only have implications for the truth of the information given if it could be shown that it was copied in full knowledge that it was not the truth. There is no evidence to suggest that to be the case. This is straightforward, uncontested witness testimony. No judge has any business to go looking behind straightforward, uncontested witness testimony, especially when to do so involves a breach with the normal rules of logic. Rationality dictates that both Miss Letby and Hudson are speaking the truth about the event, or both are lying. The same information about an event cannot be acceptable when one witness gives it and open to challenge when given by a different witness. That is logical nonsense running wild. Just listen to this, a few lines further down in his summing up, and ask yourself how it differs materially to what I quoted of Miss Letby's testimony on the same subject last week. I quote report. In evidence, Nurse Hudson said Letby was standing in the doorway, standing 5 to 6 feet away from the cot. The light was switched off, and the corridor light provided some illumination. There was a canopy over the upper part of the cot, and blankets were on Child I. She switched the main light on and was closer to Child I than the defendant, and could see Child I was pale. She pushed back the canopy and blankets to tend to Child I. The apnoea alarm had not sounded, and the deterioration was very surprising. End report quote. That is obviously a fuller, though clearly selective, version of what Ashleigh Hudson said. You will note that James Goss's propensity to do violence to the truth to achieve his evil designs is by now so out of control that he actually tries to have his cake and eat it by presenting the event as a timely detection of the early stages of a collapse, but by the malleable Ashleigh Hudson instead of Miss Letby, while simultaneously questioning the fact that the event took place. The inevitable cheap shot of suspicion of "very surprising" at the very end, to introduce the idea to jurors' minds that Miss Letby somehow caused the collapse, isn't even really worthy of comment. Hudson has already said the woman was standing in the doorway away from the cot. Incidentally, as a final point, note the 5 to 6 feet distance given. 5 to 6 feet is only slightly further than the psychologically optimal 4 feet we instinctively maintain when interacting with non-intimates. At 4 feet, we are able to perceive even the micro-expressions we use to intuitively fact-check the other's utterances. Is it then really such a ruse to countenance the idea that someone trained and practiced at detecting variations in skin tone might notice paleness at 5 to 6 feet, even in imperfect lighting conditions? Also, when you get the chance, have a look back at the photo of the cot and ask yourself if the distance between the photographer and the darkened cot is only 5 to 6 feet. It seems a good deal further to me. Child L, along with twin child M, was born on 8th April 2016 at the Countess, some 7 weeks premature. I think it is worth noting that child L was outweighed by over 16% at birth by the other twin. I have no information as to whether they were identical or non-identical, but I'd gathered enough by this point to work out that the health and viability of neonates is positively correlated with birth weight, so it is not rocket science to work out which was the healthier and more viable twin. Another point I think worth mentioning here is that Miss Letby was apparently working a mixture of days and nights. I'd been under the impression that she'd initially been on nights when the spike in death started, then, at the secret behest of the consultants, been shifted onto days months later. I'm not attributing any significance to this. I just think it's worth remarking on, as it must have been pretty hellish physically and for her sleep patterns. I'm surprised she put up with it. In messaging colleague Sophie Ellis, she mentioned staff being off sick and agency nurses providing cover who, though band 5 like her, did not have the ITU qualification that she had completed the previous April. She comments on 11 April, the unit is in dire way with staff. This was also the time she moved into her house. This might explain why she was putting up with being chopped and changed between day and night shifts. The remainder of Miss Letby's testimony on both child L and child M, naturally intertwined, is basically a relating of the routine clinical incidents naturally focused on the management of child L's persistent low blood sugar over the next several days and a couple of health deteriorations in child M over the same period. Beyond the construction put on the extended hypoglycemic episode and those health collapses by the prosecution to fabricate the 2 cases, the only matter of note in the testimony is Miss Letby having to account for having taken home handover sheets she had scribbled notes on. I dealt with that subject at length in, I believe, part 1 of this series, so there is nothing more to say on it. Benjamin Myers then moves on to child N, a boy born June 2nd, 2016 with haemophilia. Miss Letby testifies that this was her first experience of a baby with haemophilia. She further suggests this was the case across the unit. I quote report. A message Letby sent to a colleague on June 2nd. Everyone bit panicked by seams of things, although baby appears fine. End report quote. Child N also appears to be one of the cases where, as we were only to learn in summer of 2024, the Crown prosecution supplied erroneous door swipe data. A collapse is recorded by the resuscitating doctor at 1:10 a.m. on 3rd June, and while Miss Letby does not appear to be represented anywhere in the documentation relating to that incident, door swipe data apparently has her entering the neonatal unit at 1:15 a.m. That is obviously 5 minutes after the collapse in question, but with the fog of suspicion the prosecution and the judge had managed to create around her, that proximity in time is likely to have been enough for some jurors to draw an unfavorable inference. The situation for Miss Letby is also not helped by this being one of those shifts about which she had no memory. We know that she wasn't Child N's designated nurse as Christopher Booth was, and we can infer that the babies she was caring for were in a different room from her negative response to Benjamin Myers' question as to whether she had been aware of the 1:10 a.m. collapse. The prosecution's next fabricated attack on Miss Letby on Child N, attack by Miss Letby on Child N, is on June 15. I'm going to let the facts of that episode speak for themselves. I quote report. 12 days later, Child N had a profound desaturation at 7:15 a.m. on June 15, the court heard. Letby said she looked after Child N on June 14 and did not recall any concerns with him, but his condition had deteriorated by the time she arrived for duty the next morning. She said she went to Nursery 3 to talk to colleague Jennifer Jones-Key, who was a good friend of mine. Letby said she was stood in the doorway as her colleague tended to another baby in the room when Child N's monitor alarm sounded. She said, "I went over and found him to be mottled and not breathing properly. He was a bluish color. Straight away I started neo-puffing, breathing support, and called for help." Child then recovered from that episode within minutes, and the same thing then happened again. He dropped his saturations, his color was not good, and he was mottled. She said a registrar decided that Child then needed to be moved to Nursery 1, the intensive care room. Mr. Myers asked, "How long had you been on the unit?" Letby said, "Minutes. I had just got to Nursery 3 when this happened." Letby was on holiday from June 16 to June 22, the court heard. On successive days, on June 23 and 24, she is alleged to have murdered two triplet brothers, Child O and P. End report quote. For further context as to the psychological improbability of this scenario, consider the following exchange with Ben Myers just prior to the one just quoted. I quote report. Mr. Myers asked her about an exchange of WhatsApp messages with a nurse who cannot be identified for legal reasons on June 13, in which they referenced packing and joked about appearing on Love Island. Letby told Manchester Crown Court, "So myself, the nurse, and the other person were going on holiday together." Mr. Myers said, "How did you feel?" Letby said, "We were excited. We were looking forward to it." Mr. Myers said, "Are those people your friends?" "Yes," said Letby. Mr. Myers said, "And this is what you are chatting about?" "Yes," said Letby. Mr. Myers said, "You were going to have to go to work before you went away. How were you feeling about going to work?" Letby said, "I was happy to go to work, but I was looking forward to time off and going on holiday." Mr. Myers said, "In the middle of that you were planning on killing babies?" Letby said, "No." Mr. Myers said, That's what the prosecution is saying. Letby said, that didn't happen. Mr. Myers said, is that what was on your mind? No, said Letby. End report quote. The following 4 pieces of information from Miss Letby's testimony on the June 15 collapse are, I think, insightful. 1. The child's needs were such that at times he required the care of 2 nurses. 2. Things became increasingly panicked and chaotic around caring for the child, such that at one point there were as many as 10 to 15 people in attendance around the child. 3. Despite the baby having been born in the unit 2 weeks before, factor 8, the key chemical apparently for managing haemophilia, was still not on hand in the unit and had to be couriered across by a transport team from Alder Hey Hospital on an emergency run. Finally, 4, even baptism was offered to the parents. Ben Myers then moves on to child O, one of 3 triplet brothers born on June 21st, 2016 at the Countess, some 7 weeks premature. For June 23rd, the first shift back after Ibiza, Miss Letby is designated nurse for the triplets in room 2. She confirms that the ratio should have been 2 to 1 and adds that on the same day, 2 nurses were looking after 4 babies in room 1, where the ratio should have been 1 to 1. Upon arrival at work, she also found that on top of having to care for more high dependency babies than should have been allocated to her, she was also tasked with mentoring a student nurse, Rebecca Morgan, on her first day. A further task was carrying out Miss Morgan's unit induction, the job of a senior nurse, because no senior nurses were available to perform it. Myers then moves on to the second triplet, child P. Miss Letby's position on child P is that his medical needs were beyond the level of care available at the Countess's neonatal unit. There is very much the sense from her testimony that the baby's death was simply a lost race against time. The transfer to level 3 Alder Hey had already been arranged, and the baby seems to have died just ahead of the arrival of the transfer team. It also needs to be noted that there is hard evidence of Miss Letby having been affected by a death on each of her first 2 days back from her holiday. A message on June 23rd to a colleague reveals that she mislaid her handover sheet only to find it in a milk freezer. In the final hours of her shift the following day, she actually ends up in A&E as a patient, having stabbed her finger with a needle from child P. She also gives this further evidence. I quote report. She said she was unwell. I had fainted. She said from the stress of the day she hadn't eaten. The enormity of the past 2 days had taken its toll. End report quote. The last of the 17 babies on the indictment is child Q, a boy, born June 22nd, 2016, 8.5 weeks premature. By 25th June, Miss Letby had relinquished her mentoring responsibilities, explaining that she was drained and emotionally exhausted by the events of the previous 2 days. She was, however, in the unhelpful position of being designated nurse for child Q in room 2 and another baby located in room 1. 2 days afterwards, she became aware for the first time of the management activity which would culminate in her redeployment from the unit. I think her text messages around that development offer excellent insight. I quote report. Letby's messages between herself and a nursing colleague are shown for June 27. Letby: I reckon there's going to be big meetings, etc., about what's going on with the unit being closed, lack of staff, etc. Letby tells the court the unit being closed was closed to new arrivals. Letby had messaged, We're way over capacity, and it's skill mix too. Letby tells the court it was an ongoing issue. Late that day, Letby messaged her, "E just phoned telling me to do days this week and not to go in tonight as trying to protect me." Response: "What's that mean?" LL: "I don't know. Asked if there was a problem and she said no, just trying to protect me, as had a difficult run just before holidays, less people on nights, etc. and we can have a chat, etc. tomorrow." "But I'm worried I'm in trouble or something," Letby said. "It seemed an unusual thing to do." Response: "Don't worry. How can you be in trouble? You haven't done anything wrong. Just very unfortunate." LL: "I know, but worrying in case they think I missed something or whatever. Why leave it till now to ring?" End report quote. Miss Letby took a couple of days annual leave July 4th to 6th for a family holiday. The day before she was due to go back to work, she received the news she was going to a meeting with Arian Powell. At that meeting, she was informed that she would not be going back to the unit for the time being. Once again, I think Miss Letby's social media conversations around this development offer the greatest insight into the true reality of the whole prosecution. I quote report. The email from Yvonne Griffiths on July 15 is shown to the court, referring to Miss Letby's redeployment to an office-based role in the hospital. Letby said she wasn't happy about the move and it had been imposed on her. She said she was aware that by this time the Countess's neonatal unit had been redesignated to a level 1 unit. Letby's message on August 8 to a nursing colleague: "Tony phoned. He's going to speak to Karen and insist on the review being no later than first week of September, but said he definitely wouldn't advise pushing to get back on the unit until it's taken place. Asked about social things and he said it's up to me, but would not advise speaking with anyone in case any of them are involved with the review process. Thinks I should keep head down and ride it out and can take things further once over. Feels a bit like I'm being shoved in a corner and forgotten about by the trust. It's my life and career." He's not been given any information about the evidence he asked for, which is good. He's not sure what the external people are going to look at in relation to me, but we are in the process now, so I'll have to ride it out. Reply: "Okay, we'll just have to take his advice then, suppose," followed by downcast face emoji. LL: "Still can't believe this has happened. It's making me feel like I should hide away by saying not speak to anyone and going on for months, etc. I haven't done anything wrong." Letby said she was expected to lie about things going on, that she was happy to be redeployed elsewhere. After the email was sent about secondments, Letby said, "OMG. She sent email about secondments," followed by 3 times crying with laughter emojis. "Email is on fire." LL: "Bloody hell. Fuming. I'm in email and makes it sound like my choice." The court hears that Letby had filed a grievance procedure against the hospital. Letby tells the court that by this point, "I didn't know what to do. It was having a massive impact on all aspects of my life. It was emotionally very difficult. I was lonely. I didn't know what was going on." End report quote. Her final words: "I only ever did my best." Only a person with an agenda would challenge the truth of that statement after studying the case. Okay, so feel free to share your thoughts and any information you think might be of interest in the comment section below. As usual, thank you for watching, thank you for your time, and all the best.